Hi, this is Kelly. You're listening to Dr. Ella Webster on Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Demcast Podcast Network.
Hey everyone, it's Sophy from Two Broads Talking Politics, and joining me today is Dr. Ella Webster. She is a candidate for Virginia House of Delegates to represent District 98. Welcome, Dr. Webster.
Thank you.
Can you just sort of start off by introducing yourself to our listeners? Tell us a little bit about, who you are, where you've been, and kind of how you came to be running for the House of Delegates.
So I am a physician, and I'm from a Virginia family. My mother was born in Richmond, and her parents were both born in Halifax County, and that goes sort of all the way back to when white people first came and stole their land. We're not any native. We're completely English and Scottish. And my mother married a Yankee, and so I was born in Vermont and raised in Maine, and went to high school on Long Island. Went to college, studied anthropology, joined the Peace Corps, went to med school. Moved to Virginia to hang out with my grandmother for a while. She lived to be 100. I'm still here. So like a lot of people, I was kind of casually political until 2016. I started to get a little bit more involved around issues of healthcare. I worked at a free clinic, which is Virginia has a robust free clinic system, which works well in the areas where they're at. Free clinics provide care to people without insurance below a certain income level for no or a nominal fee, and they have people who organize prescription assistance programs, and they tend to have relationships with their local healthcare systems, and local physicians are comfortable providing charity care in that context because we talk a lot about the doctor-patient relationship, but I like to compare healthcare to a bird on a nest of eggs. The doctor is the chicken and the patients are the eggs, but the nest in which the eggs rest is incredibly important. If the nest has holes in it, then the eggs are going to fall out. And if the nest is too rigid and made out of concrete, then the chicken's going to break the eggs. Whereas if you have a good solid nest, any chicken can sit on it. And so the nest is made by nurses and clerks and social workers. It's not that the doctor's not important, but without a solid foundation, it doesn't really matter how good the doctor is. So I was getting political because of that, and then 2016 happened, and my family's 400 years out of Scotland. I can't go back. So I don't have any choice but to fight. In 2017, I worked on this race. A wonderful woman named Sheila Crowley ran. She had a background in housing policy, and I'd hoped that she would run again in 2019, but she had some health problems and would not run for love or money. So nobody stepped up, and I think it's important that all races be contested. So here I am.
Awesome. Just for our listeners who aren't familiar with the 98th district, can you tell us a little bit about your district, sort of where it is in Virginia, and kind of give us a feel for it?
So the east part of Virginia is on the Chesapeake Bay, and then there's a peninsula that runs down the ocean side of the bay that's called the Eastern Shore, and it's made up of Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. The inner side of the bay is three peninsulas, the northern neck, the middle peninsula, and the peninsula that's called Hampton Roads. And so my peninsula runs between the York River and the Rappahannock River, and it's one of the least gerrymandered districts in Virginia. It's 5 complete counties and 2 precincts from an adjoining county. It is 65% Republican. It's a lot of farmers, not a lot of industry, not a lot of suburbs. It's an interesting place.
You mentioned a little bit about being a physician. Can you tell us sort of about healthcare in Virginia and kind of where you're hoping to move it if elected?
Mm-hmm. Virginia is the 9th wealthiest state in the country, and once we finally got Medicaid expansion, which happened after the 2017 election, We flipped. The Democrats took 15 seats in the House of Delegates, and actually the person that I'm running against voted for Medicaid expansion after having had a challenger. After he swore he wouldn't do it, Sheila ran against him. I think he heard nothing but Medicaid expansion from his constituents and finally realized that it was the right thing to do. We are down to about 5% uninsured, so there's two things that I think can happen in Virginia. One is that we can provide coverage to everybody, but coverage isn't actually health care. And one of the problems with coverage is that medical care in the United States really, truly costs too much. And we've been waiting for the feds to do something, and they keep farting around. And one of my thoughts is that on a state level, because Virginia has a relatively narrow uninsured gap, because it's a relatively wealthy state, the piece that I would attack first is prescription drug coverage. Virginia has 9 million people, and New Zealand, the country of New Zealand, only has 4 and some. In New Zealand, you can buy 5 insulin pens for $60 US. In the United States, you'd spend $100 for one of them. We, as a state, could negotiate. So Vermont tried to sort of head towards this, and so did Colorado, and they're both. Vermont, in particular, is only 500,000 people. Virginia, with 9 million people, I think is a large enough market that they could take on contracting. And there's a couple of different ways to do it, and I'm not attached to any of them, but I'd like to see the state negotiate the prices. I'd like the prices to be public and published, and you should pay the same price in any pharmacy. And we can do it by taking, the state can do it by taking over a couple of different places or simply by straight regulation. But if a few of the larger, wealthier states did it, I think we could move the feds along on this. And then that might provide some political impetus to rein in other healthcare costs. Does that make sense?
So you mentioned that, yeah, definitely. You mentioned that this district is very red. It has, the incumbent was actually not challenged by a Democrat in 2013 and then ran unopposed entirely in 2015 and then won by about 65% of the vote in 2017.
Good.
Can you tell us a little bit about sort of your path to victory, like how you see yourself being able to win in the general?
So 1/3 of people don't vote. And the theory is if there is a path to victory, it involves mobilizing people who haven't voted because there hasn't been a choice, and so they haven't seen the reason to vote. One of the things people tell me when they don't vote is that why they don't vote is they don't know who to vote for. So we're going to do voter guides on the website for each of the counties. I'm collecting bios on all the local candidates. Trying to figure out who to vote for in my local race is, I have met the man who represents me on the Board of Supervisors, and I know nothing about it. And it's hard to find out anything. And I've been asked to consider I'm wandering, but I'll come back to the point. My first bill, one bill would be about requiring certain corporations to provide data to the state for planning purposes, and the other one would be about voting, and part of that would be voter guides. They do them in California, and they're mailed to everybody's house. It has your local candidates' bios in it. They do a lot of ballot initiatives out there that we don't do, but we could legislate this. It doesn't have to be a bunch of plucky volunteers. The path to victory is we're sending postcards to every single person in the district who is registered to vote, who has not voted more than once in the past 10 elections. And they're being handwritten by volunteers. After this election, that's a project I'm going to keep working on. Win or lose, increasing voter turnout in my district is a passion project. And I've committed to running a second time in 2021 because candidates have their greatest chance of victory in their second race.
I didn't know that. That's very interesting. That they have their biggest chance to win. And yeah, I like it.
I certainly read it somewhere at some point. I hope it turns out to be accurate.
That's awesome. So one issue that you talk about on your website a lot is education. Can you talk a little bit about education in Virginia and sort of what the House of Delegates can do to improve it?
So I grew up in Maine, and it's the other state government I'm very familiar with. Maine has 4/5 of the landmass of Virginia and has 16 counties. Virginia has 136 counties, which means it has 136 school systems and 136 sheriffs and 136 Commonwealth attorneys. There are 8,000 people in Matthews County. Why do they need a whole school district and a Commonwealth attorney and a sheriff? Virginia also is in the 30s with how they pay teachers. So when you rank teacher pay, Virginia comes in down in the mid-30s. Again, we're the 9th richest state. That shouldn't be. There's no path to multiply their income. So a teacher's starting salary is in the 30s in Virginia, and there's no way for them to get to what's considered a sort of 80,000. 75 to 80,000 is the level at which people stop feeling like they need more money. Money and happiness, money does buy happiness up until about that point. And the fact is that we're not paying teachers that much in this state, and I have a problem with it. So paying teachers better, but also treating them like professionals. One of the things that seems to stand up as you go and look through all the studies on education is that allowing principals more autonomy. We have these standardized tests in Virginia, the SOLs, and they were intended to be a sort of a basal test, like they would give them, and as long as everybody passed, the district was doing okay, but it's turned into this weird fetish culture where everybody teaches to the test, and they're not particularly ambitious tests. And so I feel like education in Virginia has been dumbed down by this test. So I would get rid of those just straight off. I would raise teacher pay. I would legislate smaller classes, because one of the things that seems to be is that smaller classes can help compensate for disparities of background coming into education. So a class of 13 to 17 kids will do better, even if they're poorer and have less resources outside of school. And how we fund schools, I'm not sure why. Like funding schools based on local property taxes, like it's historical, but why do we do it that way? And is that, and we go back to Matthews with its 8,000 people. They're funding schools off 8,000 people's taxes. And is that, I would shift that. And I have a real issue, and I am absolutely opposed to public vouchers. I think public education is the foundation of a democratic country, and Virginia, at the K through 12 level, too many families opt out rather than working at improving their school system.
So can you talk a little bit about, I know you mentioned healthcare and education, but are there any other issues that are really coming up as you're talking to voters in your district, and do any of them surprise you?
Broadband. Information infrastructure is huge. One of the things that happens in Virginia is Virginia loves public-private partnerships. And what it seems to be is a reason for the Commonwealth to give my tax money to a private company to try to bribe them into doing more business. Somebody is working on a list of all the incentive money that Virginia has paid out over the past 20 to 30 years, and whether or not the incentives that they gave actually came into something that benefited the citizens. And it doesn't seem to work. And so the internet is probably a utility at this point. We probably should just accept it and move on. One of my first bills would be requiring telecom providers to provide service data to the state and local government, because the county of Gloucester wants to figure out where they're at with internet, and they can't, because the two internet companies that provide service here won't tell them. They won't tell them who they provide service. The other thing is that the state has been handing out these grants to various local monopolies to expand their coverage. And it just expands it a little bit, and it still costs too much, and everybody complains about it. Whereas if you put in, I'm unclear on whether states are allowed to do this or whether there's a federal law prohibiting it. And trying to find out. But if you can require that all internet companies allow access to their network, it's related to the net neutrality law at the federal level. Allowing competition, not allowing one company to own too many layers of the market, so that owning the content, owning the equipment that it runs on, owning the servers that make it function. When one company owns all of that, it becomes impossible for smaller businesses to get in, and it becomes non-competitive. I would like us to look at the internet in terms of, not just in terms of providing service to people and how much consumers pay, but lowering the cost of entry into the business for small business. It should be 30 or 40 ISPs, internet service providers, in the provide service at competitive rates, and instead there's one or two.
What would you say is your favorite part running for delegate? What would you say is the best part about this race for you?
It's going to people's houses. It's wandering down. It's wandering down dirt roads and finding just amazing gardens. And there's a woman in Gloucester who has done mosaics on her house is lifted up because of the recent flooding, and she's done mosaics on the pillars under her house. And it's beautiful. Mm-hmm. There's a family down the other way that has topiary elephants. Like they cut their bushes to look like elephants. I mean, these are just random people in rural Virginia. And it's so much fun. And everybody's dog.
That's awesome.
I've met the nicest dog. And you drive up, and there's this big dog outside, and he's got a collar on, and he's not on a chain. And you can tell that the people who left him there think he's guarding the house. And I always start slow, and then I open the door, and I don't get out of the car right away. And 90% of the time, they walk right up and just lay their heads in my lap. Oh, yeah. And I meet interesting people, and most people were really sweet. And even sometimes, when you wander into a Republican household by mistake, and they'll be like, "No, dear, I'm sorry, we're not going to vote for you, but I'm so proud of you for running."
That's so sweet.
And it is. And I disagree with my opponent about politics, but he's a neighbor. He's a part of my community. He's a pharmacist. I'm a physician. I've known him for years. And I'm really proud of both of us at how clean we've kept the whole thing. And there's not trash talk going on.
Mm-hmm.
He is a Republican, and he believes in smaller government, and he believes in the primacy of corporations, and I think that that's not accurate. I think that's not the best way to run things. I think that markets are always regulated to some extent, and markets are always regulated to benefit someone, and in the United States, we've shifted to regulate them to benefit large corporations, and I'd like to shift them the other way.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Democracy. Virginia is not the worst state about democracy. Virginia is not the worst state in the country about things like making it hard to vote and gerrymandering, but it's also not the best. And I support the 2021, the One Virginia campaign to get a nonpartisan district. There's something called nested districts, which requires that the House of Delegate districts would be an even multiple of the Senate districts, and the state Senate district would be made up of a whole number of delegate districts. Because the current system, like I have 3 different state Senate races going on in my district. One of my state Senate companions his state Senate district has 11 counties in it, including one where he only has 2 voters. I mean, it's just silly. Huh. And it's confusing, and people don't know who the representatives are, and it benefits the incumbent because it creates apathy. If elected, I would, early voting, vote by mail without, no excuse absentee. I would let counties, if counties wanted to try vote by mail, people in Oregon won't shut up about how wonderful it is. If a county in Virginia wanted to try vote by mail, let them. We'll see how it goes. I'd also like ranked choice voting, particularly in the primaries. When you have those big 5-way primaries, ranked choice voting would produce better cut candidates, more consensus candidates. Eventually, I think it'd be nice to use statewide in the general elections, but rather than force it down people's throats, I'd like to try it out in the primaries and let people sort of kick the tires on it. And voter guides. There's no reason in the world that we can't produce voter guides. And I think local registrars should publicize their early voting hours better than becoming and same-day registration.
Cool. Well, if voters in your district want to get involved with your campaign, or maybe want to send you some money or learn just sort of more about you, how can they do that?
Well, my website is ellaforthe98th.com, but you can also get there through ellawebster.org. It's easier to spell. I was very creative, and it was a silly thing to have done. But, oh well. Yeah, we're on Facebook. And there is another Dr. Ella Webster. She is a rheumatologist in Mississippi, and we're Facebook friends.
Awesome. Well, I hope our listeners will check that out. Thank you so much for talking to us, Dr. Webster. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I will be following along with your campaign, and hopefully you'll have some volunteers to come and help you write all those postcards.
Yes, we are writing postcards 4 days a week right now. And then when that's over,
awesome.
Then we call everybody.
Well, that is awesome. We will be following your campaign and hoping to see a win in November.
Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics, part of the Dimcast Podcast Network. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.